Haunted cabins.
Are you ready for this?
We met through social media. A handful of mutual friends had served as the spark to ignite the fire that would overflow through our screens in the following weeks. It couldn't have happened any other way. Right from the beginning, we felt a connection, practicing with each other. At first, it was a bunch of messages throughout the day and night, and then the messages took a turn, evolving into photos with little clothing. Eventually, we started talking on the phone daily. Her name was Quetzal, and I was her mockingbird. We decided to meet. I knew that one of our great shared passions was listening to birds sing. For our first date, I decided to rent a cabin near the city where we would spend a whole weekend. I understand that it's not the ideal place for a first date with someone you met through social media. I get the fear, given the number of criminals whose modus operandi involves fake accounts and other types of electronic scams. Believe me, having that level of trust in a stranger is hard to explain to someone who hasn't experienced this kind of connection. I felt safer because we had so many mutual friends. After doing a bit of research and hearing references, I knew she was trustworthy. I suppose she did the same on her end since she agreed without hesitation. The day before we were to meet, I got a haircut. The next morning, I packed my bag, which would wait in the car trunk all day until my shift ended and I could begin the journey. I won't lie, the hours passed well, as if each minute wanted to show off, trying not to bore me. I sent her messages, and she replied without haste. But the bad news came around noon. I had to cancel due to work issues. It feels like having a bucket of ice water poured on your head at 5 a.m. on a winter morning in Alaska. Why does expressing the frustration caused by such incidents ruin everything? I mean, understanding that we're all slaves and exploited doesn't lessen the sense of frustration. The cabin was dark, and my weekend plans were ruined. I decided to take the trip alone, even though I had mentally prepared myself for a frustrating trip. I drove for 2 hours until I reached the place, which was quite isolated from the other cabins. You entered through a gate, and the property was quite extensive, much larger than a soccer field. The house was surrounded by a pine forest, and even before crossing the gate, you could sense the change in the air, a sort of heaviness that hung in the atmosphere. There was a kind of darkness that seemed to cover the entire place, as if this cabin in the middle of nowhere was incapable of hiding a terrible event. The fact that the sky was so overcast made it seem like it was almost night, even though it was still early in the day. The cabin was made of stone, with tall, vine-covered walls. The windows were dirty, and the curtains seemed thick and old. The immediate garden looked neglected and added to the eerie atmosphere. The cabin's walls were made of stone and were quite high, with overgrown vines that gave the place a gloomy appearance. As I approached the entrance, I saw an older couple waiting. Both were over 70, dressed in denim, and they both smiled. They looked like an ordinary elderly couple, and I couldn't understand how they endured the atmosphere of this place. They greeted me warmly and showed me the inside of the cabin. It consisted of a fairly spacious living and dining area, with a fireplace ready to be lit. There was a kitchen at the back, and the bathroom was on the left, with the only bedroom on the right. It had 2 beds, where the old couple slept. She went into the kitchen automatically and began to make coffee. The old man took a few minutes to explain the history of the place. He said it had always been a lumber forest owned by his family for generations. He talked about the nearby lake, reachable on horseback, and how beautiful the place was. According to him, all the couples who came here loved it. I replied with a brief smile, 7 seconds of awkward silence, and a sip of the freshly made coffee. After that, they showed me my rooms, which were on the 2nd floor, laid out similarly to the old couple's rooms, but with a rustic decoration they had designed to perfection. A few minutes after they left me alone, I noticed that I had forgotten the discomfort that the place gave me, which undoubtedly intensified when I began to feel watched. I went for a walk to explore the surroundings, but the rain forced me back after 45 minutes. As it was about to get dark, I didn't feel so frustrated. At least I could sleep and enjoy the 2 full days ahead. I locked myself in the room and lay down on the large square cork bed. I fell asleep, and I don't know how much time passed. I woke up feeling uncomfortable and checked the time on my phone, It was 3 in the morning. The room was as cold as ice, and the feeling of being watched didn't stop. What made me jump against the back of the bed was the breathing I felt on my right ear. My eyes, still adjusting to the darkness, couldn't make out anything, but my ears didn't deceive me when I heard small footsteps heading to the living room. I lay in bed, terrified, and, as if it would be of any use, I covered my head with the blanket. Then the footsteps moved on, and I heard the front door close. I lay there, frozen in bed, gripped by panic. I'll never forget the shiver that immobilized me when I remembered closing the door upon my return from the forest walk. The next morning, I didn't mention anything about the previous night's incident to the old couple. I knew it couldn't have been them. Living in a multi-story housing complex with a family of 6 as neighbors on the upper floor gave me the ability to differentiate between the footsteps of men, women, old people, and children. What I had heard last night was undoubtedly a child. I had my breakfast and engaged in a conversation with the old man. He talked about his former job as a local police officer and then proudly showed me his collection of shotguns and some awards he had won for his service. He was a good man, but I couldn't stand being inside the house. I kept the conversation going for a few more minutes and then went for a walk. I walked for a while until I saw the entrance gate and continued walking. That's when I noticed the change in the atmosphere. The heaviness had lifted, and the air was breathable again. Realizing this change overwhelmed me, and I sat by a tree beside the path and started to cry. I called Quetzal because I needed someone to talk to. I told her everything that had happened, trying not to cry, of course, and she listened attentively. When I finished telling her, I thought she'd say I was crazy. Contrary to all logic, she seemed surprised and told me I was lucky because if I had the chance to record my experience in that place, I could make a lot of money. I told her I didn't find the idea so amusing, and she added in a seductive voice, "Just think about what we could do with all that money. Neither of us would need to work, champ. No canceled romantic dates." And, as anyone with a smidgen of knowledge of physics knows, the force exerted by a pair of female pectoral circles will always be less proportionally to the force exerted by a duo of cargo transports, blood pressure, therefore. So, I accepted the proposal. I returned to the cabin on foot, recording a video log of my experience with the change in atmosphere as I went. While recording, I noticed a fork in the path that led to a grave with only one name, Marcella. She was born in 1987 and died in 1992. She was just a child. Then, I heard footsteps behind me. When I turned around, I saw the old man, but his expression was completely different. I could only see anger in his eyes. "What are you doing here? This place is forbidden for visitors. Why don't you go to the lake like everyone else?" he shouted at me, furious. I felt completely offended by his tone, and I used the only power I had at that moment to defend myself, being a paying customer. I told him that nowhere did it stipulate that the place was off limits. But if my presence bothered him, we could cancel the contract. The old man calmed down and said in a serious tone that I shouldn't go near that area because many clueless customers like me had mentioned hearing strange things on that side of the forest. Some had even claimed to have seen a little girl around Marcella's age wandering among the trees. I ate my breakfast and held a conversation with the old man, who talked about his former job as a local police officer and proudly showed me his collection of shotguns and some awards he had won for his service. He was a good man, but I couldn't stand being inside the house. I continued the conversation for a few more minutes and then went for a walk. I walked for a while until I saw the entrance gate and continued walking. That's when I noticed the change in the atmosphere. The heaviness had lifted, and the air was breathable again. Realizing this change overwhelmed me, and I sat by a tree beside the path and started to cry. I called Quetzal because I needed someone to talk to. I told her everything that had happened, trying not to cry, of course, and she listened attentively. When I finished telling her, I thought she'd say I was crazy. Contrary to all logic, she seemed surprised and told me I was lucky because if I had the chance to record my experience in that place, I could make a lot of money. I told her I didn't find the idea so amusing, and she added in a seductive voice, "Just think about what we could do with all that money. Neither of us would need to work, champ. No canceled romantic dates." And, as anyone with a smidgen of knowledge of physics knows, the force exerted by a pair of female pectoral circles will always be less proportionally to the force exerted by a duo of cargo transports, blood pressure, therefore. So, I accepted the proposal. I returned to the cabin on foot, recording a video log of my experience with the change in atmosphere as I went. While recording, I noticed a fork in the path that led to a grave with only one name, Marcella. She was born in 1987 and died in 1992. She was just a child. Then, I heard footsteps behind me. When I turned around, I saw the old man, but his expression was completely different. I could only see anger in his eyes. "What are you doing here? This place is forbidden for visitors. Why don't you go to the lake like everyone else?" he shouted at me, furious. I felt completely offended by his tone, and I used the only power I had at that moment to defend myself, being a paying customer. I told him that nowhere did it stipulate that the place was off limits. But if my presence bothered him, we could cancel the contract. The old man calmed down and said in a serious tone that I shouldn't go near that area because many clueless customers like me had mentioned hearing strange things on that side of the forest. Some had even claimed to have seen a little girl around Marcella's age wandering among the trees. Back at the cabin, my spirits were up. At least now I was sure that Quetzal didn't think I was crazy and might even believe that I was brave. When I returned to the cabin, I noticed through the window that the old man hadn't arrived yet, and the lady was busy cooking. When I went up to my room, all my things were in disarray, as if someone had tossed them all over the room. This felt like a violation serious enough, and I decided to go and make a formal complaint to the lady. She listened to me attentively, but she assured me that no one had been in my room. Although this fact bothered me greatly and would have been reason enough for me to leave any hotel I stayed at, I didn't want Quetzal to think I was a coward. So, I decided to pass the time left in the day by going to the lake the old man had kindly recommended. When I returned, it was starting to get dark, and I was hungry. I enjoyed the delicious dinner the lady had prepared, and the old man had returned to his usual role as a diligent host, and our conversation was significantly less uncomfortable than in the morning. After dinner, I went back to my room, took the flashlight I had brought for nighttime walks, and turned on my phone to record. Not much time passed before I began to hear footsteps on the roof of the cabin. They were small, fast-paced steps. I closed my eyes to pretend I was asleep, and the steps stopped. After a few minutes, the small steps were right outside my front door. I continued to pretend to be asleep. The terror I felt when I heard the door of my room opening paralyzed me for what felt like hours. But in a moment of bravery, I grabbed my flashlight and shone it at the door. For a few brief seconds, the light illuminated a silhouette that was peering at me from the darkness. The image I saw, as terrifying as it was unreal, waiting for me in the doorway, was a little girl. When the light touched her eyes, I tried to scream, but the accumulated fear swallowed my voice, and the scream that I tried to summon from the depths of my being refused to come out to confront the night specter. The little ghost moved away, and I ran after her with my phone in hand, but when I reached the door, the little girl had completely disappeared. My breathing was heavy, and my legs were trembling. To gather some courage, I sent a message to Quetzal and told her what had happened. She asked if I had recorded her, and I told her I hadn't. She laughed and said I was missing out on the opportunity of our lives that night. I stood guard, waiting to hear something, but hours passed, and nothing happened. Sleep slowly overcame me, and I fell deeply asleep. The weight of a lump on my legs woke me up. When I opened my eyes, the girl was on top of me. I threw a punch at her that knocked her to the floor. She bounced back up as if she had springs in her legs, and she provoked a loud crash when she fell. I ended up on the floor with the little demon on top of me. In a quick move, the girl brought her head to my shoulder and bit me on the neck. I won't lie, I screamed like a pig in a slaughterhouse. With my other hand, I grabbed her by the neck and pulled her away with all my strength. I felt my own warm liquid soaking my shirt, but I didn't let go of the girl. At that moment, the old man burst in with a shotgun, and he shot me without hesitation. The shot hit me in the shoulder, but I didn't let go of the girl. Behind the old man, the lady entered, shouting desperately for me to let go of her granddaughter, who was just a little girl. Then I heard a gunshot, and everything went dark. Memories of the past 2 days alternate with nightmares of demons rising from the ground to take me to hell. Sometimes I regain some consciousness, but I don't recognize where I am, a dark room filled with a foul smell, delirious from the fever caused by the gunshot and the bite. Sometimes, in my dreams, I see little Marcella, hear her laughter, and feel excruciating pain in my right leg. Then the sirens and the gunshots, then the men breaking into the darkness, and then nothing. I wake up in a hospital, and Quetzal is sitting by my side, smiling, although it's evident she hasn't slept in days. She explains that she needs to tell me something important. It turns out that the little Marcella wasn't a ghost. She was almost blind at birth, only perceiving certain patterns of light. Her mother, a hardcore drug addict, locked her in a room from the day she was born and treated her like an animal. The girl grew up without any human contact. After 3 years, her mother died of an overdose, and her body wasn't discovered until 3 days later because a neighbor reported the stench. That day, they found Marcella nearly on the brink of death. The old man, who was a policeman at the time, had never had children. He took the girl without telling anyone and brought her to his home. In the first few days, the girl was weak and bedridden. Approaching her was impossible because she would attack the old man. As time went by, they realized the girl was an untamable beast, and it was too late to return her to normality. They decided to let her fend for herself in the forest. After a few weeks, during which the girl didn't return, they erected an empty grave for her in a hidden spot. I listened in astonishment to this story, recalling everything that had happened. It was even more unbelievable that Quetzal was telling me all this at that moment. She then told me that the girl had returned to the cabin one day. She liked playing on the roof, but never entered the house. The old couple left food for her outside, and the girl lived freely and wildly. For financial reasons, the old couple had to rent out the upper part of the cabin, thinking it was safe because the girl showed aversion to people and only came near at night. They had never had problems until the incident that happened with me. Astonished, I asked Quetzal how she knew all this, and she told me that after the old man shot me, he had chained me in the basement for 2 days. She had been worried because one of our mutual friends was my coworker. He said I had been absent, and she immediately reported it to the police and took them to the cabin, where they discovered that little Marcella had been feeding on my leg for the past 2 days. I left a review about the poor service at the place on every internet forum I could find. Thank you for staying until the end of the video. Don't forget to activate the notification bell to stay up to date with our broadcasts. See you in the next video.